Hi, everybody. This is Todd Creager, and today I want to talk to you about three healthy family patterns and contrast it with three toxic family patterns. I'll probably start with the toxic just to end on a better note, but basically, I have talked about toxic families, which another phrase is dysfunctional families, and I've defined it as when a person is robbed of being themselves, of being their natural developing self. So I could talk about many, many kinds of patterns, but I really want to focus on three to go a little deeper with them. So let me start with the first. The first one I wrote down here is that in um, in a healthy family pattern, I guess I'll start there. In a healthy family pattern, the parents parent the child, right? That's what happens. You know, we had our children, and it was our job to parent them, to regulate them, not only when they're 0 to 2, but 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up. And now that they're in their mid to late 20s, we still parent them in different ways than we did when they were younger, but we're still parents. They know they could come to us. We're big for them in a sense. I mean, that doesn't mean that they don't help us out here and there. And when people get much, much older, oftentimes it's typical for the middle-aged or older parents to take care of their older parents. But for what I'm saying by big is they know that they could come to us and we're there for them. That we might have some good advice, or we, we more important than advice, I guess, is that we attend to them, we tune into them, and that's what happens with healthy families. Now, in toxic families, I've seen this over and over that it can be the reverse, where the child ends up regulating the parent. Now, the child is 6 months old, isn't able to do that, even though they learn things really early. But the child, pretty soon after, believe it or not, starts to learn it's my job to regulate the parent. I've had people talk to me how they were 3, 4, 5 years old, and they would definitely try to be good, really, really good, because they could tell their parent was out of control or anxious or depressed. And in order for the child instinctively to feel safe, the child has to suppress their own wants and feelings and needs to take care of the parent. I have a client I'm seeing now, and I've had many through the years, but I'm just thinking of one right now who he tended to, him and his sister, but really was he the older one? I'm blanking now. But I, but I know he was in a role of taking care of his mother from very young. Father passed away at a very young age, and the mother couldn't cope very well, couldn't handle. So instead of being a little kid that had problems at times, or fears, or hopes and dreams that would go to his mom, and his mom could handle it, that he oftentimes, what was on his mind, and this happens with children, if you have this experience, you'll resonate with this. What's on the child's mind a lot is, how's my mom doing? How's my mom doing? How's my mom doing? I need to take care of my mom. And so, of course, if a child is focused on how's my mom doing, or it could be dad too, but in this particular client's case, it's how's my mom doing, then how much attention is going to be to what do I want to do? Spontaneously, like, oh, I want to play this game with my friend, or I want to go have a sleepover with this friend, or I want to learn this musical instrument. It doesn't happen that way in some of these families. Of course, there's a spectrum, right? So there's families where it could be leaning towards toxicity, and those that are more extreme. But overall, in this person's case, there wasn't a whole lot of room to think about himself, because his job was to make sure his mom was okay, be a good boy, actually would have to regulate her by being there for her, listening to her problems, and being there. Childhood is dismissed. So you end up seeing this kind of thing. And then this child grows up into an adult, oftentimes, that has a really hard time depending on people. It's not part of the agenda. They're really good to be dependent upon, but not really good to depend upon others. and it definitely cuts off a big part of who they are. So in my work with people that came from these kinds of toxic patterns, my job is to help them discover their not their smallness, but their healthy dependency, and to let others be there for them, be big for them, listen to them, and that's important. All right, second pattern. Second pattern is that I think is really important in healthy families is that all feelings are tolerated. I'm not saying all feelings are enjoyed. I know when my kids had temper tantrums, or even when they get really, really angry now, it's not enjoyable. But we have to tolerate it. We have to be able to bear it. We have to be able to regulate our own emotions so that we don't do what happens in toxic families with this toxic pattern, shaming. Shaming is the pattern. Shaming or suppressing. We could definitely give children messages that they're bad because we're upset. So if a child says, I don't like you, and they're 3 years old, the healthier parent will go, all right, you know, you don't like me. I remember one of my kids said, I hate you. I think she was 5. And I said, I know you hate that. I took that, whatever that was, away. It was a consequence I gave her. And you hate that I could do that. And you have to accept that. She goes, no, I hate you. And, you know, I had to bear it. It was just, that was it. You know, I didn't shame her. She just couldn't express her feelings any better than that at that age. And, you know, 20 minutes later, hi, Daddy, I love you. You know, it moves on. Whereas in a toxic family, an expression of I hate you, let alone something even less triggering, like I'm mad or I'm angry or even I'm scared of something, may not be tolerated because it triggers feelings of anxiety or some uncomfortable feeling in the parent. And so the parent, in order to regulate their own, and they don't do it in a healthy way, they shame the other person or tell them, don't you ever say that to me again. Don't you ever say that to me again. I mean, I have had several clients right now in my caseload that describe being molested and went to a parent where it's like, this is what just happened to me. And the parent couldn't contain and manage their own truth, their own feelings, and said, what'd you do? Or shamed them in some other way. I'm thinking of a few. Or saying, you know what, just let it go. Why? Because maybe it meant having to disrupt the family that the person couldn't do or didn't want to do. And so now the child is learning that I can't, and again, it's related to the first one, that they can't be little. They can't be who they are. They have to suppress, and those feelings aren't tolerated. In some families, uh, the only feeling that might be tolerated is anger. I've had families where it might seem a little stereotypical, but I see this a lot. You have a military father, and the father doesn't tolerate any sissy, quote unquote, sissy feelings, which is ridiculous. There's no such thing as sissy feelings. Feelings are all kinds of feelings are human. Sadness, fear, disappointment, frustration, anger, and compassion, and all those feelings are great. But all feelings are human. But in that particular family, in a military family like the one I'm thinking of, that it was okay to be angry, but it wasn't okay to be sad, disappointed. It wasn't okay to cry, even at any age, really. That's harmful. That's toxic. So we need to be able to, again, relating to the being big for our children. The first pattern that I described, feelings need to be tolerated, and the only way they're tolerated is when the parents have the capacity to regulate themselves. Um, the last pattern I want to talk about, which I see a lot, and I have examples of that too, is reasonable limits and reasonable structure versus, that's in the healthy family, versus in the more toxic family pattern, one extreme or the other. Either chaos, where there's no supervision, no structure, no limits, the child is running amok, or the children are running amok, or on the other extreme, it's rigidity. It's rigidity. You've got to follow my rules. This is the only way to do it. It's my way, not anybody else's way. If you are, and this happens. I've had many clients where It's a boy. Now he's a man, he's my client, but as a boy, he didn't like sports, he liked art. And the father had an idea that, no, you need to do sports, and so um, there would be a rule of that. You have to do it, you have to do it, you have to do it. There's no opening to say, well, you need to try it maybe, and if you don't like it in a month from now, then maybe we'll shift something else. That's fine. But being open to the child and listening to the child. Chaos is the child does whatever he or she wants, and of course that can cause a lot of problems, especially as a teenager, and on and on. But in rigid families, what I have found, in many of my cases, especially since many of you know, I specialize with sexuality. So often there's a lot of rigid rules around sex. So when it comes to a lot of shaming, you can see how these are all kind of related. But rigid rules about sex, when the child then may have these natural urges, but they're shamed, or they have to follow such rigid rules, then if they do have, I had one person who had sex when she was 16, and at 46 she was feeling 36. I don't want to make her older than she is. 36, she was feeling so ashamed of herself, but she was trying to live up to these rules that weren't, to me, in line with reality. Did we put rules on? Did we put structures on? We did with our kids, about even, rules about sex. But of course, one good rule about sex is tell us. We won't shame you. Tell us if you're thinking about it or if you're struggling with it. I know my wife personally, I have to vouch for her. She did a phenomenal job with both our daughters. And then and up to this day, they have had a very open relationship because she gave them the message that this is what I want, this is what I'd like, but what's most important is for you to listen, right? That's a healthy family pattern. I mean, for me to listen to you. I want you to share. I don't want you to hide. Now, I'm not saying my kids told us every little thing they did. I'm not that naive, but there was still a very open kind of relationship that's, yeah, very, very open expression with my wife, and to me to a lesser extent, but definitely from my daughters to my wife. So, so I've seen adults, for example, when there's rigid rules around sexuality, let's say, um, is they oftentimes are feeling a lot of sexual shame, or the opposite happens and they act out, or they have a very hard time getting to know what they want because they've been just so busy following rules that they didn't have the space and the permission to just say what turns me on. So as adults, they oftentimes have a very difficult time with that. So these are just three of the patterns. Again, the patterns I talked about is when the parent parents the child, which is the way we would like it to be, versus the child parents the parent. The second one is that all feelings are tolerated versus none, or just some are and some aren't. And then the same is reasonable limits and structure in a family, where we set rules, but we are also open to listening and recognizing that children need to be heard, and that we can't, to be too controlling will boomerang back. It'll boomerang back. A symptom that I've worked with some people where there's been so much control is anorexia nervosa, for example, or bulimia, where there are issues oftentimes, not always, but these could be symptoms of feeling powerless and so controlled that they try to find an area where they have control. Um, and again, so that extreme rigid family or that chaotic family can lead to those kinds of issues and more. So I just wanted to bring that out. If any of these resonate with you, and often many of us have had some of these resonate with us to some degree, then take a look at some of my blogs and my other articles. Of course, I'm here to help in any way I can. There's some products I have. Definitely have some products on toxic families, dysfunctional families, and those kinds of things as well. Now, this is Todd Creager, making the world safe, full of love.